The smell of burnt coffee hit me before Blake's voice did. 2 sugars, no cream, and wipe down those water spots on the conference table. Pinnacle executives arrive at 10 sharp, he barked, tossing his car keys at me like I was the janitor. I caught them instinctively, staring at the contract proposal glowing on my laptop screen. The one I had spent the entire night perfecting, researching every clause, every potential liability. My name appeared nowhere on the document, as usual. I set his coffee down carefully on his mahogany desk, swallowed the familiar sting of being treated like hired help, and quietly clicked send on an email that could change everything. Blake didn't glance at my screen. He never paid attention to my actual work. He was too busy scrolling through his phone, probably checking his golf schedule. The meeting was starting in 10 minutes, and something deep inside me shifted. Today felt different. Today, I decided I would stop letting him define my worth, stop letting him reduce me to coffee runs and cleaning duties. Today, I would remind myself who I really was beneath all his small humiliations. After the clients left, shaking Blake's hand and praising his leadership, he slid a crumpled piece of paper across my desk without looking up from his phone. It was his dry cleaning ticket, wrinkled from his pocket. Make yourself useful and pick this up before they close. The blue suits need to be ready for Friday, he said in that dismissive tone I had grown to despise. I almost wanted to laugh out loud. The contract revisions I had worked on until 3 in the morning, while he slept peacefully, had just saved our company nearly $200,000 in penalty clauses. I had caught 3 critical errors that would have bled money for years. Instead of pointing this out, I tucked the receipt into my desk drawer and opened my email inbox. There it was, a single message that made my pulse jump. Pinnacle Corp. $2.6 million structure review. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. The client's head of legal wanted to schedule a private call with me, just me. Not Blake, not the team, me. The woman who supposedly only knew how to fetch coffee and organize filing cabinets. We spoke in whispers after 11 at night, the kind of conversation where you feel your backbone straightening with purpose. The head of legal at Pinnacle had concerns about liability exposure, and we systematically addressed each one. We cut through corporate buzzwords and identified the real risks, then built an honest path through the complexity. I paced around my small apartment, laptop balanced precariously on my kitchen counter, scribbling notes on the backs of old grocery receipts. The client's worries were completely valid. Blake's original structure would have exposed both companies to unnecessary legal challenges down the road. But I knew exactly how to fix it. At 2:15 in the morning, we finally had a framework that protected everyone involved. I could picture the contract like a bridge I was engineering piece by piece, calculating every stress point and reinforcement. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my boss slept comfortably, probably dreaming about his next promotion, I was saving his biggest deal of the year. The call ended with the client saying, "Send me your revisions tomorrow. I trust your analysis." Trust. When was the last time Blake had said he trusted my judgment about anything? Morning arrived with its usual parade of small humiliations. Blake dropped a broken stapler on my desk with a loud clatter, handed me a stack of restaurant menus to file alphabetically, and instructed me to straighten the chairs in conference room C because they looked messy. He glanced at his watch dramatically. "You're running behind schedule today," he muttered, even though I had arrived at the office at 6:30 to finish the Pinnacle revisions. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste copper. Pinnacle's chief operating officer had just responded to my overnight analysis with a message that made my hands shake. This is the first breakdown of the liability issues that actually make sense to our team. Brilliant work. I printed the email immediately, dated it carefully with a red pen, and slipped a copy into the locked folder I kept in my bottom desk drawer. The folder was labeled Documentation, because I had learned the painful way how quickly credit could vanish in this place. Blake never looked at my screen, never asked about my correspondence with clients, never showed the slightest curiosity about how deals actually got made. We eliminated a liability clause that would have cost the company $3 million over 5 years. I presented the revision to our senior legal counsel, and she stared at me like I had just discovered electricity. The clause was buried in subsection 12 of the addendum, the kind of detail that only someone actually reading the contract would catch. "Who authorized you to negotiate these changes?" she asked, her voice a mixture of admiration and confusion. She flipped through my analysis, highlighting key sections with her pen. "Nobody authorized it," I replied, and the words tasted sharp in my mouth. "I saw the problem and fixed it." That afternoon, Blake presented my exact changes to the executive committee, reading word for word from my analysis without changing a single comma. He stood at the head of the conference table in his perfectly pressed suit, gesturing confidently while describing his solution to the liability issue. He never glanced in my direction, never acknowledged the person who had actually done the work. I wrote the word "remember" on a yellow sticky note and pressed it inside my desk drawer, next to my growing documentation file. Blake sent me on an increasing number of personal errands. I scheduled his dentist appointments, picked up dry cleaning for his wife, organized his expense receipts, and tracked down a replacement remote for his office television. Each task pulled me away from actual legal work, but I started keeping a detailed log: dates, times, duration, and what client work I was forced to abandon. The list wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. I needed concrete proof of what was really happening here, evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Late at night, after Blake had gone home to his suburban mansion, I lived inside contract revisions and risk assessments. I analyzed shipping terms, studied international trade regulations, and researched precedent cases until my eyes burned from screen glare. My phone buzzed at 11:37 with a message that made my heart race. "Your latest liability revisions have been approved by our board. Final presentation scheduled for tomorrow morning." Tomorrow was the moment of truth. Everything I had worked for would either be recognized or stolen completely. I stared at my bedroom ceiling, preparing for war. I carried the final contract draft through the corporate lobby like it contained state secrets. The document represented months of work, hundreds of hours of research, and countless late nights spent perfecting every clause. Blake intercepted me near the elevator bank and bumped my shoulder deliberately as he passed. His cologne was overpowering, probably expensive. "Try not to embarrass me in front of the Pinnacle executives," he said with that smug smile I had. "Learn to hate." His tone suggested I was a liability, a weak link that might somehow sabotage his moment of glory. It took every ounce of self-control not to laugh in his face. The CEO of Pinnacle had specifically requested additional time to speak with me privately after the main presentation. I held that secret close to my chest like a weapon I was saving for the right moment. I looked Blake directly in the eyes and replied, "You won't be embarrassed." Because I knew that after today, embarrassment would be the least of his concerns. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep people try to bury it. During the video conference, Blake launched into his standard presentation about strategic partnerships and value creation, using all the corporate buzzwords that meant nothing. The Pinnacle executives listened politely, but I could see their attention drifting. Then their CEO interrupted him mid-sentence. "Excuse me, Blake, but we'd like to hear directly from her about the liability revisions." Blake's face went pale. He gestured toward me reluctantly, like he was introducing a trained animal that might bite. I stood up slowly, and my voice came out steady and clear. I explained the original problem areas in plain English, then walked them through our solution step by step. No jargon, no fancy PowerPoint slides, just honest answers to their legitimate concerns. The silence on the call lasted forever. Then Pinnacle's CEO said, "That approach addresses exactly what our legal team was worried about: clean, efficient, and protective for both parties." We ended the call with handshake agreements and next steps. I saved the recording in 3 different locations on my hard drive. Blake smiled tightly and said, "Nice support work there." "Support work." I smiled back and replied, "Happy to lead when needed." I printed every email approval, dated every revision note, and created backup files on multiple flash drives. One drive stayed taped under my desk, another in my car, and a third at home in my fire safe. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being realistic about corporate politics and the way credit had a tendency to migrate toward the most powerful person in the room. My friend Zoe from the accounting department pulled me aside in the break room and lowered her voice. Blake has been asking questions about your client communications. He wanted to know if you'd been going around him on the Pinnacle deal. I nodded grimly and stirred my coffee. Zoe continued, I think he's planning to take full credit when this contract closes. He's already been dropping hints about his innovative approach to liability management. I took the stairs down to the parking garage to think. In the concrete stairwell, surrounded by echoing footsteps and fluorescent lighting, I made a decision. If Blake wanted to play games with my work, I would make sure I had all the rules written down ahead of time. At 4:03 in the afternoon on a rainy Tuesday, the fully executed contract came back through our system. $2.6 million, signed and legally binding. I stared at my computer screen until tears started forming in my eyes, then quickly blinked them away. Corporate offices aren't kind to people who show real emotions. I immediately forwarded copies of the executed agreement to our legal department, finance team, and operations group. Each email included a detailed summary of the key changes I had negotiated, with timestamps showing exactly when each revision had been proposed and approved. I made absolutely certain my name appeared on every piece of documentation. Every email signature, every file name, every attachment header. This deal belonged to me, and I wasn't going to let it disappear into someone else's career narrative. Then I closed my laptop, leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, and took the deepest breath I had taken in months. It felt like surfacing after being held underwater for an entire season. The contract was signed, the money was real, and my fingerprints were all over the success. My desk phone rang from a blocked number, making my heart skip in that startled way that happens when you're not expecting contact. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "This is Harrison from Pinnacle Corp," the voice said. Professional, warm, but with an edge of excitement. I gripped my pen tighter and tried to sound composed. "I wanted to call you personally to discuss your work on our contract," he continued. "The way you restructured the liability sections was exceptional, brilliant, ethical, and incredibly efficient. You saved both our companies from years of potential legal complications." My hands started shaking, but it was the good kind of trembling, like relief flooding through my nervous system after months of pressure. "I haven't seen someone negotiate with that level of skill and integrity in quite some time," Harrison added. "Your approach was refreshing in an industry that often prioritizes speed over thoroughness." When the call ended, I sat motionless in my chair for several minutes, staring at the wall calendar and trying to process what had just happened. Recognition, acknowledgement, professional respect. Things I had almost forgotten existed. News spreads through office buildings faster than email servers can handle. Within an hour, people started glancing up from their computer screens like they had heard distant thunder rumbling. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when I walked past cubicles. I overheard two senior managers whispering near the copy machine. "She closed the Pinnacle deal, $2.6 million in revenue," like the numbers themselves were somehow scandalous. Their voices carried that tone people use when discussing office gossip that might actually matter. Blake's corner office door was cracked open, and through the gap I could see his face changing colors as congratulatory emails flooded his inbox. My name was highlighted in bold letters in message after message, and he looked like he was watching his carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. He called me into his office with a smile that resembled a grimace more than an expression of happiness. I walked through his doorway and made a deliberate choice to remain standing. The power dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically, and we both understood exactly what was happening. This conversation was going to determine how the next phase of my career would unfold. Blake launched into a speech filled with collective pronouns. We had negotiated brilliantly. We had structured the deal perfectly. We had delivered exactly what the client needed. He used the word "we" approximately 20 times in three minutes, as if repetition could somehow rewrite history. I listened patiently until he finished, then slid my carefully organized timeline across his mahogany desk. The documents included midnight email threads, recorded phone conversations, and client approvals addressed specifically to me by name. Everything was dated, verified and backed up with digital signatures. Blake stared at the papers spread in front of him but made no move to touch them. His hands remained folded in his lap. "Let's be smart about this situation," he said quietly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Don't make this political. We can work together here." I smiled calmly and replied, "This isn't about politics, Blake. It's about facts. These documents show exactly who did the work and who deserves the credit." I gathered my timeline back into a neat stack, slipped it into my folder, and walked out of his office. He remained sitting behind his desk with his mouth slightly open, looking like someone had just explained a complicated magic trick. A meeting invitation appeared in my email inbox with an official corporate header: Executive Review, Pinnacle Contract Success. I scanned the attendee list carefully. Blake's name was there. The CEO was included. Senior vice presidents had been invited. My name was conspicuously absent. My stomach dropped momentarily, then quickly steadied as I realized this was exactly what I had been preparing for. I added myself to the meeting with a professional but firm note: primary negotiator attendance required for accurate project review. I attached my executive summary and supporting documentation, including client communications that clearly established my role as lead negotiator. Within 10 minutes, my addition to the meeting had been accepted by the system administrator. I took the elevator down to the lobby and walked slow circles around the parking lot, practicing my talking points and breathing exercises until the cold winter air stopped stealing my voice. I was going to walk into that conference room and tell my story truthfully, completely, and without apology. They could accept it or not, but they were going to hear it. The executive conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows and lighting that made everyone look slightly artificial. Blake opened the meeting with a joke about team victories and collective success, trying to set a tone that would make individual recognition seem inappropriate. I didn't laugh. Neither did most of the executives around the table. When the senior director turned her attention to me and asked for my perspective, I stood up slowly, placed both hands flat on the polished conference table, and told my story without embellishment. Here was the original problem. Here was what failure would have cost us. Here was the path I chose to solve it. Here was the successful outcome. Heads nodded appreciatively around the room. The atmosphere felt respectful, professional, attentive. "Who led the client negotiations?" the senior director asked directly. I looked her straight in the eyes and answered, "I did." Then I waited for lightning to strike, for someone to challenge me, for the sky to fall. None of those things happened. Instead, there was thoughtful silence and several impressed nods from people who understood the complexity of what I had accomplished. Blake interrupted with a dramatic gesture, waving his hand like he was conducting an orchestra. His voice carried a tone of paternal correction, as if I were a child who had gotten confused about the facts. "Before we start handing out individual medals, let's remember this was a collaborative team effort. Everyone contributed to this success." I met his eyes across the polished conference table, then calmly clicked to advance my presentation slide. The new image showed a screenshot of an email from Pinnacle's chief legal officer sent directly to me 3 days earlier. The message read, "Your contract revisions, your risk analysis, and your deadline management saved this entire deal. Thank you for your exceptional work." The conference room went completely silent. You could hear the heating system cycling and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Then the door opened unexpectedly, and a voice I recognized said, "I apologize for interrupting your meeting." I turned around and nearly forgot how to breathe properly. Harrison from Pinnacle Corporation was standing in our doorway, looking completely comfortable and utterly unexpected. Harrison stepped into the conference room like he had been personally invited to attend. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and he moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. He shook my hand first, with a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I was in the building meeting with your CEO about future projects," he explained casually to the room. Then he addressed the entire table of executives. "If you're discussing the Pinnacle contract, I wanted to be absolutely clear about leadership and credit. This conversation directly affects how we'll structure our ongoing partnership. Blake's confident expression started cracking around the edges like old paint in the sun. Harrison's voice remained friendly, but carried unmistakable authority. She led every aspect of this negotiation. Our team followed her guidance throughout the entire process. Her expertise and integrity made this deal possible. For a moment, the conference room felt weightless, like we were all suspended between the old reality and whatever was about to happen next. This was definitely not how anyone had expected this meeting to unfold. Least of all Blake, who looked like he was witnessing his entire career narrative dissolve in front of witnesses. I assumed that would be the conclusion. Professional validation, appropriate credit, and a return to normal office dynamics with a new understanding of my capabilities. I was completely wrong about what came next. Harrison turned back to face me directly, and I noticed he was holding a leather folder that looked expensive and official. His expression shifted into something that resembled a business proposition. "Actually, I have an offer I'd like to discuss with you," he said, sliding the folder across the conference table like it contained documents that could change my life. "Pinnacle wants to bring you in-house to lead our entire contracts division. We're expanding rapidly, and we need someone with your skills managing our major agreements." The room erupted into the kind of controlled chaos that happens in corporate settings. Shifting chairs, sharp intake of breath, whispered conversations, and the sound of someone's coffee cup hitting the table harder than intended. My heart started hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape from my chest. Harrison continued calmly. "The title would be Director of Contract Management, reporting directly to me. The compensation package reflects the level of work you're already doing, plus equity participation." Blake's laugh sounded sharp and desperate, like glass breaking. "She doesn't have the seniority or experience for that kind of executive role. This is premature." Harrison didn't turn to look at Blake. He kept his eyes focused on me. "She has demonstrated competence, which is more valuable than seniority. Results matter more than time served." I felt heat climbing up my neck and spreading across my cheeks. The attention from everyone in the room was intense, but not uncomfortable. More like standing in a spotlight I had finally earned. The executive director interrupted the tension. "Could you step outside for a few minutes while we discuss this situation internally?" she asked me politely. In the hallway, Zoe appeared at my elbow like magic. "Breathe," she whispered urgently. "Just breathe through this moment." Through the glass conference room walls, I could see Blake gesturing wildly, like a drowning person trying to signal for rescue. His body language looked panicked and desperate. The conversation inside appeared heated. I wondered what kind of last-minute character assassination he was attempting. What lies he was telling about my work, or my attitude, or my qualifications. When they called me back into the conference room, someone from Human Resources had joined the meeting. She sat with a manila folder positioned precisely in front of her, wearing the kind of neutral expression that HR professionals perfect over years of handling workplace drama. "We need to address some concerns that have been raised about your process and communication protocols," she said in that carefully modulated voice that HR people use when they're about to deliver bad news wrapped in corporate speak. Blake still wouldn't make eye contact with me. He studied his hands like they contained fascinating secrets. I opened the HR folder and found printed screenshots of email conversations that definitely had not existed in my inbox the previous week. The messages appeared to show me excluding Blake from important client calls and making major decisions without proper authorization. My throat felt tight and constricted. But then I remembered the insurance policy taped under my desk. I had been preparing for exactly this scenario for months. "I'd like to present my own documentation," I said calmly, producing my flash drive and requesting access to the conference room computer system. I connected my drive and methodically displayed my complete timeline on the large conference room screen. Call logs showing exact timestamps. Meeting invitations with Blake's name clearly included, and his responses declining participation. Email threads proving I had repeatedly attempted to keep him informed of client communications. Audio recordings of key conversations, where I had specifically asked for his input and been told to handle it yourself. Bank statements showing late-night work sessions while Blake's corporate credit card showed dinner charges at expensive restaurants during the same time periods. I never wanted this situation to become personal, I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. But I will not allow my work to be misrepresented or my integrity to be questioned based on fabricated evidence. Harrison's jaw visibly tightened as he reviewed my documentation. The executive director flipped through printed emails, her expression shifting from skeptical to genuinely angry. The HR representative cleared her throat uncomfortably. Given this new information, we'll disregard the previous concerns that were raised. Blake looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor, sink into the earth, and emerge somewhere far away where nobody knew his name. Blake made one final, desperate attempt to salvage the situation and reassert control over the narrative. His voice carried a tone of wounded authority, like a dethroned king making demands from exile. She's being emotional about this whole situation. This is exactly the kind of drama we try to avoid in professional settings. She's not executive material. The senior executive director cut him off mid-sentence with surgical precision. That's enough, Blake. Your comments are inappropriate and unhelpful. Harrison spoke quietly, which somehow felt more powerful than if he had raised his voice. You attempted to diminish her contributions because her competence made you feel threatened. That kind of behavior has no place in our business relationship. Blake finally looked directly at me, and his expression was pure hatred mixed with disbelief. He couldn't understand how the quiet woman who fetched his coffee had managed to outmaneuver him so completely. Maybe I had finally developed the professional teeth I needed to defend my work. Maybe I had always possessed them and just needed the right circumstances to reveal them. Either way, Blake's reign of small humiliations and stolen credit was officially ending in this conference room, in front of witnesses, with documentation that couldn't be disputed. The conference room settled into expectant quiet. Everyone seemed to be waiting for the next move in what had become a very public chess match. Harrison turned to face me directly, his voice steady and businesslike. We're offering you the position of Director of Contract Management at Pinnacle Corporation. You would report directly to me and lead the team that handles all our major client agreements. The compensation package reflects the actual value you bring to this level of work. He slid the printed offer letter across the table with the confidence of someone who was accustomed to making decisions that changed people's lives. My hands felt perfectly steady as I picked up the document and read through it carefully. The salary figure was nearly double what I was currently earning. The benefits package included health insurance, retirement matching, and stock options. The job description matched exactly the kind of work I had been doing unofficially for months. I looked up at the room full of executives and said clearly, I accept your offer. Something that had been locked tight in my chest for years finally clicked open, like a door I had been pushing against, suddenly swinging free. I submitted my standard 2 weeks' notice and spent that transition period doing something Blake had never bothered with, creating comprehensive documentation so the remaining staff wouldn't be abandoned without guidance. I wrote detailed handover instructions for every active client relationship. I organized digital files into logical folders with clear naming conventions. I created step-by-step procedures for contract review processes that had previously existed only in my head. My replacement would have everything she needed to succeed, unlike the way I had been thrown into complex negotiations without training or support. On my final day, I cleaned out my desk methodically, packing my few personal items into a small cardboard box. A desk plant that had survived 3 years of fluorescent lighting, a coffee mug my sister had given me for Christmas, a framed photo of my parents. Blake was nowhere to be seen when I walked past his office for the last time. At the security desk, I placed my corporate badge in the return tray. It made a soft plastic sound that somehow felt like thunder rolling in the distance. My phone buzzed immediately with a text message. Welcome to Pinnacle. Your office is ready Monday morning. The new office smelled like fresh paint and unlimited possibility. There was a nameplate on the glass door with my full name and new title, etched in elegant letters. Director of Contract Management. The words looked surreal, like someone had written them in a language I was just learning to read. Before my new team arrived for our first staff meeting, I stood alone in the quiet space and let the magnitude of the change wash over me completely. Through my window, I could see the city skyline stretching toward the horizon, full of buildings where other people were fighting their own battles for recognition and respect. I thought about coffee runs and dry cleaning errands, about late nights spent perfecting other people's deals, about the exact moment I had decided to stop making myself small for the comfort of insecure managers. Then I opened my laptop, began drafting our first team communication in clear, honest language that respected everyone's intelligence, and smiled. Revenge wasn't loud or dramatic or filled with confrontation. It was simply walking through the right door and knowing that you had built the key yourself. One careful decision at a time, one late night at a time, one moment of refusing to disappear at a time.